4.2 Measuring the budgetary position of the government. Alternative approaches. The figures for the size of the budget deficit presented earlier represent the most common measure of government deficits that are used in public debate. Yet there are a number of alternative ways of representing the budgetary position of the federal government that are important for policymakers to consider. Real versus nominal. The first alternative way to represent the deficit is to take into account the beneficial effects of inflation for the government as a debt holder. An important distinction that we will draw throughout this text is the one between real and nominal prices. Nominal prices are those stated in today's dollars. The price of a cup of coffee today is $3. This means that consuming a cup of coffee today requires foregoing $3 consumption of other goods today. Real prices are those stated in some constant year's dollars. The cost of today's cup of coffee in 1982 dollars would be $1.34. That is, buying the same cup of coffee in 1982 requires foregoing $1.34 of consumption of other goods in 1982. Using real prices allows analysts to assess how any value has changed over time relative to the overall price level, and thus how much more consumption of other goods you must give up to purchase that good. The overall price level is measured by the Consumer Price Index, capitals CPI, an index that captures the change over time in the cost of purchasing a typical bundle of goods. Sidebar. Real prices are prices stated in some constant year's dollars. Nominal prices are prices stated in today's dollars. Consumer Price Index, an index that captures the change over time in the cost of purchasing a typical bundle of goods. Returning to the text. From 1982 through 2009, the Consumer Price Index rose by 124%. That is, there was a 124% inflation in the price of the typical bundle of goods. So any good whose price rose less than 124% would be said to have a falling real price. The cost of that good relative to other goods in the economy is falling. That is, the amount of other consumption you would have to forego to buy that good is lower today than it was in 1982. Similarly, a good whose price rose by more than 124% would have a rising real price. For example, the cost of a typical bundle of medical care in the United States rose by 264% from 1982 to 2009. So in real terms, the cost of medical care rose by 264% minus 124% or 140%. Thus, in 2005, individuals had to sacrifice 140% more consumption to buy medical care than they did in 1982. Government debts and deficit are both typically stated in nominal values in today's dollars. This practice can be misleading. However, since inflation typically lessens the burden of the national debt as long as that debt is a nominal obligation to borrowers. This point is easiest to illustrate with an example. Suppose that you owe the bank $100 in interest on your student loans. Suppose, further, that you like to buy as many bags of Skittles candy as possible with your income, and Skittles cost $1 per bag. If you pay the bank the $100 of interest, you are foregoing 100 bags of Skittles each year. Now suppose that the price level doubles for all goods, so that a bag of Skittles now costs $2. Now when you pay the bank $100 for interest, you only need to forego the purchase of 50 bags of Skittles. In real terms, the cost of your interest payments has fallen by half. The consumption you have to give up in order to pay the interest is half as large as it was at the lower price level. From the bank's perspective, however, the price level uh, increase is not a good thing. They used to be able to buy 100 bags of Skittles with your interest payment. Now they can only buy 50. They are worse off, and you are better off because the price level rose. A similar logic applies to the national debt. When price levels rise, the nation has to forego to pay, the national debt falls. The interest payments the government makes are in nominal dollars, which are worth less at the higher price level. So when prices rise, the real deficit falls. This outcome is called an inflation tax on the holders of federal debt, although it isn't really a tax. Due to rising prices, federal debt holders are receiving interest payments that are worth much less in real terms, like the bank in the previous paragraph. This inflation tax can be sizable, even in the low inflation environment of the early 21st century. In 2008, the national debt was $5.8 trillion, and the inflation rate was 3.8%. The inflation tax in that year was therefore 0.038 times 5.8, or $220 billion. The conventionally measured deficit in 2008, government expenditure minus government revenue, was $459 billion. But if we add these inflation tax revenues to the deficit falls to $239 billion. Thus, taking account of the effects of inflation on eroding the value of the national debt reduces the measured deficit.